Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the disability community.
Gosh. Well, I grew up with a twin sister, Haley, who was born with a rare genetic disorder called Rett syndrome. Um, this was 47 years ago. So there were other names and descriptors that were used to explain, just in general, why my sister, wasn't in the general education classroom alongside me, why she couldn't talk, why she needed help and support in the bathroom. We were really poor, so I grew up being the second caregiver to my sister, relieving my mom. We went to Special Olympics here and there, and I started also getting calls as I got older um, from Haley's classmates, their parents to come and babysit, for their children with developmental disability. So I was the first person in my family to go to a four-year college, and I went on to get a bachelor's degree focused in special education. That was in 2004. And now I'm the mom to two children with developmental disabilities. It turned out I'm an unaffected silent carrier of Rett syndrome. So my sister didn't get diagnosed until our first son was born. Um, and we were about 40 years old at the time. So my son Jack passed away at 8.5 years old in November of 2022 due to his fragile medical complexities with Rett syndrome. And our other son is autistic. So I've been steeped in this work and in the personal lived experience as a family member and as a sibling, as a parent for many years. I'm fortunate now that I have a small salary for the work that I do. Many folks in this community do this work for free. And so I try really hard to make sure that since I am earning money, that I give 100% because there's so few paid positions that I want to make certain that I'm pulling my weight and doing my part on behalf of a community that is underfunded and neglected and marginalized. Um, One thing that I've loved about this work is realizing my own neurodiversity. I was never formally diagnosed, but looking back, on my own academic journey after seeing my son especially struggle, I'd ace the classes that I liked and that I was motivated to attend, and then failed or just dropped out of the classes that I didn't connect with. So I'd flip from topic to topic. I'd go down rabbit holes and get deep in the weeds on other things that I um, found interesting and shy away from the things that I didn't enjoy. Um, I'd study power and relationship dynamics. I've been told I'm blunt and offensive when I don't mean to be. So finding a community of like-minded people that you don't have to explain things to has been the biggest gift for me personally, and that's been a wonderful journey.
Hmm. My next question is, tell me a little bit about your work in the disability community. I know that you said that you have a large body of work, so if you could explain that, that would be great.
Yeah, it's varied. And so I mostly focus on state policy and impacting state policy, but I do that obviously alongside other colleagues. So in addition to trying to give a great quality of life to my two kids, one of whom had a host of medical complexities, and the other is autistic and turning 7 in a few days. Um, I've worked in Washington state to eliminate sub-minimum wage certificates. That means businesses and, more importantly, the state of Washington can no longer use a person's disability as a reason to pay them below the minimum wage for work. So alongside brilliant advocate colleagues like Ivanova Smith, Sean Bickley, Eric Mathis, John Lemus, and our legislative champion, Senator Emily Randall, we eliminated some minimum wage certificates and said if a person's going to work, they're entitled to minimum wage protection, just like their non-disabled peers. I'm also really proud of the work that we've done to eliminate IQ testing requirements that our state is currently using, and they're required to phase those out to determine if someone is eligible for services. So again, alongside my brilliant colleagues, Adina Protonentis, Emily Fung, and Hodan Mohammed, we made our case to the state legislature that using IQ tests was problematic because they're rooted in racism, ableism, and eugenics. And more importantly, people couldn't find psychologists to issue the tests in a language other than English. So we partnered with a legislative champion, Representative Jamila Taylor, who is a fabulous advocate here in Washington State to help eliminate that testing requirements. And I'm elated to say that goes into effect July next year. So that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, alongside fellow parent advocates, Katie Sheed, Christina Smith, Whitney Stewart, Lindsay Topping-Schweetz, and Darcy Ladwig. And again, with our legislative champion, Representative Jamila Taylor, we're working to allow parents of Medicaid-eligible developmentally disabled minors to be paid for their extraordinary caregiving work in order for their child to be able to live in the community and not in a more restrictive or institutionalized setting. What does that mean? Well, it means that when a child is assessed to need an institutional level of care, the child is put usually on what we call an IFS waiver, which is kind of the bare minimum amount of services a child can receive to qualify for Medicaid and personal care hours. So the family has to find a caregiver who wants to work these typically irregular hours, nights, weekends, holidays, etc. If they can't find a caregiver, and we know many of them cannot because 1.5 million of the 3.5 million assessed care hours went unused last year. The family has to hobble along without personal care supports or respite from the caregiving work. So currently parents of developmentally disabled Medicaid eligible adults can be paid caregivers, but not so for children. So we're trying to get that bill over the hump this session. I also informally support families who are trying to get their children through the school systems. This is another issue that I'm really passionate about and do a lot of work in because schools are supposed to be these really enlightened, safe places. Keeping up on the best scientific approaches to educating children, including kids with disabilities. And here in Washington State, we pride ourselves on being anti-racist. We still haven't decided to say that we're working on being anti-ableist, and that's why I have my own child. We unschool him. But my inbox is routinely receiving messages from desperate parents of children of color who are summarily and without notice discharged from school. These children have disabilities and they're being tracked and monitored, and multiple adults are taking data of everything the kid does wrong during the day. So they, spend their energy making a case to discard the child instead of co-regulating with the child, instead of sitting with the child to understand them and the barriers that they're facing. I spoke with one Black guardian last week, actually, who had 4 Black male administrators telling her Black 12-year-old child that he's the problem. And they had a file several inches thick on this 12-year-old boy. And the district's website is filled with glossy pictures of children of color smiling and thriving, while the district I know from many examples, hasn't made any attempt to address or correct the statistics that show a purging of disabled children of color. And that's the most disturbing thing for me as a taxpayer, right? Is I vote for people who tell me they're going to get into office and address some of these really pressing social ails before us. And time and again, I don't see that happening. So I work tirelessly to educate people, but it's really frustrating to have to continually expose kind of the birth to couch or birth to prison pipeline as it's laid throughout a person's life, and constantly work to upend and disrupt the multiple systems in place that work against a person with disabilities. So.
Hmm. My next question is, what kind of stakeholders do you work with in the disability community, for your particular kind of work? Because, like you said, your work often varies, so it's different on some days, I would imagine.
It is, yeah, it's different. Yes, but there's all kinds of similarities too. Everyone's a stakeholder, internal or external. I work with people who are really impacted by their disabilities, and I work with people who have a developmental disability, but they're able to live independently, maybe with just a little bit of help. I work with families who are tasked with caring for people with developmental disabilities largely on their own. I work with bureaucrats who don't always seem to understand the impacts of their decisions. I work with policymakers who have various levels of sophistication on the topic, but mostly want to help. I work with families who are afraid to engage with systems that weren't built for them. And that includes people who speak or read um, languages other than English. I work with academics who have the luxury of thinking about these issues in kind of this ephemeral framework suspended from the day-to-day realities of keeping a person with developmental disabilities alive and living in the community. I work with people who are proud to be disabled, and I work with families who have a lot of shame to have a person with a developmental disability in their family. I work with folks who use euphemisms to describe their loved ones, and I work with people who want to be allies, show up and showing up ready to learn. So, I work with a lot of different stakeholders just depending on the day. I work with anyone and try to meet them where they're at, even if they're not where I wish they were. Um, and so, I was listening to one person who came into a leadership position in our state recently, and I realized that how they were talking about the developmental disability community made them kind of seem out of touch, and they were being dismissed by people because the language they were using, wasn't updated. Um, and so language to me is really important because it shapes how we view people and how we treat people. And so I had never met this person, but I started sending them books on the topic, and many of them curated by a really brilliant academic in our state, Adana Protonentis. Um, and also the book list by Not an Autism Mom on autism and neurodiversity. And, that person is starting to update their vernacular, and it's really exciting to just see that and have that inform their understanding of the community they're in charge of caring for. So meeting people where they're at, I guess, to me is a really powerful tool that I hope to keep sharpening.
Hmm. My next question is, tell me a little bit about the impact that your kind of work has on the disability community. In other words, like, how does this kind of work make a difference in the lives of people with disabilities, parents of people with disabilities, caregivers, you name it.
Well, I'm not sure that I get to decide what my legacy will be. But if I do get a vote, I guess it would be about two things: updating our language and continuing to evolve, and then also not settling for the confines of what people currently in power tell us is possible. That is really important to me because most people in power aren't personally impacted by developmental disabilities themselves. Um, so I feel strongly that those folks shouldn't get to decide what's best for families, what's best for people with developmental disabilities. When I first came to this community, there was a phrase that was used a lot, and that was change is made by those who show up. And it struck me as problematic because I'm also an attorney. And I learned in law school kind of the difference between what's necessary and what's sufficient to make your case. Um, so the phrase change is made by people who show up implies that all people have to do is show up and then everything will change for the better. And we know that's not true, right? That's too simplistic. Um, and I had worked in politics for a long time, and I immediately raised my hand and was like, "Excuse me, that's not true." It is necessary to show up, but it's not sufficient, right? It takes thousands of conversations with people. It requires you to ask people to step out of their comfort zone, and see you as a person worthy of community care, to see your family as worthy of community care. So, in addition to exposing the birth to couch or birth to prison pipelines and asking people to help me disrupt these systems, I try and address imminent policy and budget proposals, especially in the legislature, that folks can sink their energy into to make a difference. I'm currently a policy fellow with Open Doors for Multicultural Families, which is an organization started in our state by a fellow parent, Ginger Kwan, because she looked around and didn't see any other organization tackling the intersection of racism and ableism, and where people fall into that. And so she's got an impressive organization with 65 employees who speak 24 languages. And I'm really honored to be capacitating her and her organization with the community organizing and technical expertise to address these barriers that her organization works on.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, what can other people take away from this conversation? In other words, how can they sort of like understand how to like really advocate for a person with disability? Because we talked about how like there are certain politicians, like you said, that get into office and that don't really do anything to advocate for people with disabilities. They don't do the work. Or in other instances, parents have children with disabilities that don't often know what how to deal with a person with disability, who to look out for. So like what can people take away from this? How can they sort of what sort of tools can they use to sort of be prepared to like, go into the real world of, advocating for their child with a disability?
Oh my gosh. I love this question, and I want another hour to answer it, because there's so much to unpack there. But for me, I there's a huge need, right? And so I want to start small and then get general. So honestly, for me, I tell people, um, it makes a huge difference in a person's life to just sit with them and be present and listen to their need and their story, and to be present and fully see and believe the pain and struggles that people face. Um, I love helping people one-on-one connect to resources. You know, if someone's interested to testify on a bill, coming before the legislature, etc. But mostly I ask people to take the disability justice movement as seriously as you take the racial justice movement, and and ask yourself how you can up level your inclusion work, no matter what position you hold. You know, if you're on a board, a commission, a work group, ask out loud, where are the people with developmental disabilities here? Because, you know, you've had 30, 40, 50 years to get to this space, and still there's nobody representing people with a disability on your work group. In that same work group, ask, are there unmet access needs? My friend Adina is really good at saying everybody's got an access need. Being, you know, everybody has one. What are the access needs? And really normalizing making meetings accessible, making events accessible. Just because there was a ramp into the building doesn't mean that people with developmental disabilities can access your work group, especially in a meaningful way, right? Because you don't want to tokenize people. But my biggest hope is that but parents of kids without disabilities, I get asked this a lot, you know, how can I be an ally? Show up to your child's classroom and ask, where are the kids with developmental disabilities? When their principals and teachers say, oh, they're in the portable out back, or they're in the autism classroom, or they're in the, you know, segregated special education classroom, I want you to get angry about that. I want you to find that astonishing that that level of segregation is happening in our schools, because again, it happened at the daycares. It happened in the birth to three programs. It's happening, you know, all the way from birth throughout high school. And then we're surprised when at 21, a person with a developmental disability graduates to a couch, and there's, you know, nothing for them to do, no place for them to go in the community. Maybe they work an hour or two a week here and there. I guess for me, you know, I implore people to continually ask, where are the people with developmental disabilities? And if they're in a segregated environment, or if they aren't represented in your work group or in your social group or wherever, ask why. I think we're at such a nascent stage in this that I think we have to just start asking, wondering aloud, why? Where are the people with developmental disabilities? Where are the families who are so often isolated and excluded from so many of the events in our community? Why aren't they here? And what can we do to help get their access needs met? For parents, I work with a lot of parents who they themselves are just trying to keep their family afloat, right? And asking parents to care about inclusion, or, you know, go fight the school to get your kid into a general education classroom is too daunting. It's too much. And so again, I just come back to meeting people where they're at, asking them to acknowledge that their children are being segregated, and asking them to take the next step, whatever that is, wherever they are, to care about and wonder how we get people with developmental disabilities more fully included in our community.
Yeah, those are some important points there.